The Wrong Bus. Prologue. By the time the sun went down, Anna was running. Not literally, not yet, but her eyes were moving faster than her feet, scanning every face by the pool, every hammock, every table under the fairy lights that used to look like stars. Have you seen him? Tall, dark hair, English. He was staying here. I know he was staying here. The receptionist only shook her head. So did the waiter. No one had seen him. No one remembered him. And somewhere around her third lap of the hotel, Anna realized the only thing she actually knew about the man who'd given her his water, his time, and, somehow, in the space of one afternoon, far more than that, was his first name. 12 hours earlier, she hadn't needed anything more than that. Chapter 1. The Wrong Bottle of Water. Anna was the last one onto the coach. The engine was already idling. She paused in the aisle, scanning the rows, couples, families, a group of hikers in matching t-shirts, until she found the one empty seat, by the window, beside a man who just twisted the cap back onto a freshly opened bottle of cold water. She slipped in beside him. Habit made her clock the exits and the working air conditioning before she'd even sat down. Years of managing projects didn't switch off for a holiday. The drinks fridge by the entrance was empty, only warm bottles left in the crate underneath. She nodded at the one in his hand. "So you really took the last cold one?" "Technically," he said, "yes." "And what am I supposed to do now?" He studied her for a moment, then held the bottle out. "Now I didn't." "You've already opened it. One sip. You'll spend the trip regretting your generosity. I'll survive." His smile widened, and the awkwardness of sitting beside a stranger vanished almost instantly. She took the bottle. "Thank you." "My pleasure." He held out his hand. "I'm Mark." "Anna." The handshake was clumsy enough that they both laughed. By every unwritten rule of traveling with strangers, that should have ended it. Instead, he turned back to her. "So, where are you from?" "London. You?" "Manchester." "I wouldn't have guessed. What were you expecting?" "Someone who talks faster." "I can, if necessary." "Please don't." He kept going, first day here, traveling alone, and she found herself telling him about her friend's flu, the canceled plans, the trip she'd almost not taken alone. "Not bad company, though," he said. "You've known me for 10 minutes. Close enough. You make decisions quickly." "It depends." "On what?" "Whether there are witnesses." He said it with complete seriousness. "If you spend the week discovering hidden beaches and having the holiday of your life, who's going to confirm any of it when you get home?" She laughed, a real laugh, warm enough that the elderly couple across the aisle glanced over and smiled. "What about you?" she asked once it faded. "What do you do?" "Structural engineer. Officially, I make sure buildings stay where they're supposed to. Unofficially, I spend my life stopping other people's mistakes from becoming expensive headlines." She laughed. "You don't seem stressed about that." "Stress doesn't improve concrete." "And you?" he asked. "What line of work?" "I manage operations." He winced theatrically. "Sounds dangerous." "Mostly meetings and reminding grown adults that deadlines aren't suggestions." "My job has a way of following me home," she admitted when he asked why she needed the trip. 2 years of it, weekends, evenings, telling myself it would be worth it once the promotion came through. And it wasn't? Friday, they announced the new head of department. Not my name. They thanked me for laying the groundwork so well. He didn't say anything clever. "Don't," she said, lighter than the words deserved. "I've had a week of people being sorry for me. I'd rather not think about it for 7 days." So this week is an escape. Not a holiday, an escape with better weather.
The conversation wandered after that. Travel disasters, childhood dreams, cities they still wanted to see. Nearly an hour passed without a single awkward silence. Then, almost by accident, they discovered they were staying at the same hotel. "What hotel are you at?" "The Royal Pearl." "So am I." "You're making that up." "Does yours have hammocks by the pool?" "It does. I have my coffee there every morning." "I spent an hour in one yesterday." "The rooftop restaurant with the fairy lights?" "That looked like stars." "I had dinner there last night." "So did I." "I never saw you." "It's a big hotel," Mark said with an easy shrug. The explanation made perfect sense. Even so, the coincidence lingered as the coach rolled deeper into the countryside, as if the morning had quietly begun to arrange itself into something neither of them recognized yet. For a while, they simply watched the scenery. It wasn't an awkward silence. Anna always believed silence had to be earned. Usually, with someone new, both sides rushed to fill it. Neither of them seemed to feel that need. "What made you choose this trip?" Mark asked eventually. "I needed to disappear for a week." "That's more serious than a holiday brochure." She smiled and told him more than she'd planned to. The 2 years, the exhaustion, the manager who'd all but locked her out of the system. He listened without hurrying to fill the pauses, and somewhere in the telling, Anna realized she wasn't analyzing him the way she analyzed everyone else. She wasn't wondering whether he was saying the right things. She was just enjoying his company. She tried reminding herself this was only a conversation on a coach. The thought never lasted. Every time she rebuilt that careful distance, Mark pointed at something out the window or asked another question, and it disappeared again. The coach rounded a bend, and the valley opened beneath them. Olive trees and the first blue outline of mountains. "There they are," the guide announced. "We'll reach the springs in 20 minutes." They still had the whole day ahead of them. The hot springs, the cave, the drive back, then an evening at the hotel, where, as far as either of them believed, the same pool and the same lights would be waiting. Neither of them thought to ask for the other's number. Why would they? They were certain they'd see each other again that evening. Neither of them imagined that by the time the sun went down, each of them would be looking for someone who had vanished without leaving so much as a surname.
Chapter 2. The Road to the Springs. Mark was first off the coach, the scent of sulfur reaching him before anything else, warmer and less sharp than he'd expected, like steam off a fresh cup of coffee. The hot springs looked exactly like the brochure, only more striking. White travertine terraces cascaded down the hillside, filled with milky, turquoise-shot water. Tourists picked across the stone barefoot, shoes dangling from their hands. He offered Anna his hand over an uneven patch near the entrance. She took it as naturally as she'd taken the bottle that morning, and he found himself holding on a heartbeat longer than courtesy required. They slipped off their shoes and stepped in. The water swung from nearly too hot to startlingly cool within a few feet. "Careful," he said, "it's slippery." The words came out sounding less like advice and more like a safety briefing. Anna grinned. "Thanks, Dad." "Fair enough, I deserved that." A few moments later, she proved him right. Her foot skidded on the calcite, and his hand was around her elbow before he'd even thought about it. "See," she said, catching her balance, "you're good for more than checking handrails." They wandered terrace to terrace. At one overlook, an elderly couple asked if they'd pose for a photo. "We're not together," Anna started to explain. "Such a shame," the woman said warmly. "You make a lovely couple. Stand together anyway. The picture will still be beautiful." They exchanged an amused glance and stood side by side. Neither of them argued very hard. "The worrying part," Mark said afterwards, "is how quickly I gave up defending myself." "So did I,"
Later, Anna held out her phone. "Since we're already pretending, take a proper picture of me." He framed the shot, steam rising behind her, sunlight catching her hair like a pale halo. He took several without saying a word. "My turn," she said, raising the camera before he could object. Mark's hand moved before he did, a quick press against the inside pocket of his jacket, there and gone in less than a second. Then he turned toward the view, easy again, as if nothing had happened. Anna lowered the phone a beat late. "There," she said. She didn't ask what he'd been checking. They fell into a silence that didn't need filling, rare for two people who'd met that morning. Eventually, the conversation wandered back on its own. "What did you want to be as a kid?" he asked. "I changed my mind every 6 months. Vet, ship's captain, television newsreader." "What happened?" "Management came more naturally than biology, and nobody ever offered me a ship." They reached a narrow wooden bridge over one of the pools. Mark rested a hand on the railing, gave it a firm push, and stepped aside. "After you." "You always do that?" "Do what?" "Check everything before someone else uses it?" He hesitated. That wasn't a question you answered with a joke. "Occupational hazard," he said, finally. "It happened 3 years ago, my first project as lead engineer. A foreman I trusted told me a batch of concrete had passed inspection, showed me the paperwork, signed and stamped. I didn't check it myself." "And?" "A few weeks later, during a routine inspection before we poured the next floor, they found cracks in 2 support columns. We demolished them, started over." He looked out across the terraces. But that wasn't the part he remembered. "I kept thinking, what if nobody had noticed? What if we'd found out after 6 more floors were standing above them?" "Nothing happened," Anna said, quietly. "No, because someone checked in time, not because I'd done everything right." He shrugged, as if trying to put the memory somewhere outside himself. "Since then, I don't sign anything until I've checked it with my own eyes." Anna watched the water. "That must be exhausting." "Sometimes. And yet you still do it. The buildings stay standing." She laughed, and the tension dissolved as easily as the steam around them. He realized he'd just told her something he'd never explained so openly to any of his closest friends, and that she hadn't interrupted once with, "Why didn't you quit?" or "Whose fault was it?" She had simply listened. He was about to ask if she had a story like it when the guide called everyone back to the coach. Nearly 2 hours had passed. It had felt like 20 minutes. "The cave's waiting," Anna said, slipping her sandals back on. Once again, neither of them thought to exchange numbers. There was still half a day left before evening.
Chapter 3. The Cave. The temperature changed the instant they stepped inside. After the heat of the springs, the cool air felt almost shocking. The guide handed out torches. "Watch your heads. The path narrows. The rocks are slippery. Stay close together." The group stretched into a line, Mark a step behind Anna, his flashlight sweeping the damp walls. "Is it always this dark?" she asked, mostly because the silence felt too complete. "I imagine the bats don't mind. Careful, low ceiling." She ducked, almost in time. Her shoulder clipped an outcrop, sending grit down her shirt, and at that exact moment something rustled overhead, fast and impossibly close. "What was that?" "Bats," he said, calm enough to make her feel ridiculous. "The guide mentioned them. You were paying more attention at the springs than during the safety briefing." She'd barely laughed it off when her foot found a slick patch of rock. Her arm flew out, and Mark's arm was already around her waist, pulling her back before she fell. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. "Thank you," she said, catching her breath. "Second time you've caught me today." "Occupational hazard. I don't like watching things fall when I can stop them." Even complete strangers you meet on tour buses? Especially them. The passage opened into a vast chamber, stalactites hanging like stone chandeliers under soft amber light. The guide stopped beside the largest. More than 200,000 years old, grows about a centimeter every century. Mark and Anna drifted toward a smaller formation, watching a single drop gather at its tip. So, do you inspect everything too, or is it just my brain that's permanently rewired? I do, but not because of buildings. She watched the droplet swell. 2 years ago, we launched a payment gateway for one of our biggest clients, the week before Black Friday. Our contractor sent over a report, every box ticked. We were under pressure, and I trusted somebody else's report instead of checking it myself. What happened? The system went down, 6 hours on Black Friday. The client left 2 weeks later. She gave a short laugh with no humor in it. But that wasn't the worst part. My manager never raised his voice. He just pointed out that the report I'd signed off on had never actually been tested. He blamed you without saying it. He didn't have to. Since then, whenever somebody tells me it's already been checked, I check it again myself. That sounds exhausting. It is, but the payments go through. His quiet laugh held the same recognition hers had a minute earlier. Neither of them felt any need to fill the silence that followed, comfortable, as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. Anna almost told him she'd shared that story with hardly anyone outside work. She never got the chance. A phone vibrated inside Mark's pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and the warmth disappeared from his face so abruptly Anna noticed before she realized he'd stopped smiling. She caught a glimpse of the screen before he turned away. No name, just a string of numbers. "I'm sorry," he said, already backing toward the tunnel. "You have signal down here? Looks like it. I'll be a minute." She watched his flashlight vanish around the bend, then turned back to the stalactite, watching another droplet gather at its tip. It grew patiently, without hurry, until at last it fell. For the first time in a long while, Anna realized there was nowhere else she wanted to be. Chapter 4. The Wrong Bus. The phone crackled with static. "Mark, sorry to call so early," a familiar voice said, tense enough that he didn't need to ask if something had gone wrong. "We've got a problem. One of the tower cranes clipped the formwork on the 8th floor. Nobody's hurt, but work's suspended, and the client wants the chief engineer on site. Inspectors arrived this evening." "The formwork still holding?" "Yes, just an impact, not a collapse. But nothing moves until it's signed off, and every day costs money." Mark closed his eyes, already calculating flight times. "I need to fly back today." His own voice surprised him, calm, almost detached, as if he were discussing a schedule change instead of the fact that in a few hours he'd disappear from this excursion, this hotel, this unexpectedly perfect day. "I figured as much," the man said. "Will you book it yourself?" "Yes." The line went dead. For several seconds, Mark stood staring at the dark screen. Flight, taxi, pack the suitcase. There wasn't time to finish the excursion. He found the guide near the entrance of the chamber. "I need to get back to the hotel immediately. Work emergency. Is a taxi possible from here?" "It can be arranged. Private, not through the group. 20 minutes. The guide held out his hand. "Your hotel voucher? The driver will need the address." Mark unfolded the paper. Royal Pearl Resort and Spa. He stared at it. There was no premium. A chill crept through him. He read the line again. The words didn't change. Maybe the voucher had been mixed up. Maybe there was a third coach he didn't know about. He searched every line for something that might contradict the obvious. Nothing. It had been handed to him personally at check-in. There was only one mistake here, his own. The whole day replayed itself in perfect sequence. The hammocks she'd mentioned. He'd been in one yesterday too, just not the same one. The lanterns. I don't think I've seen you around. It's a big hotel. He'd dismissed it without a second thought. He should have questioned it. He'd spent the entire day on the wrong coach, not the Royal Pearl where he was actually staying, the premium, the one Anna must have boarded that morning. Neither of them had ever said the hotel's full name aloud. They'd simply assumed they were talking about the same place, and neither had bothered to check. He checked everything, always, except this. "Your voucher?" the guide reminded him, and photographed it before speaking into his radio. 20 minutes. Wait outside the cave." Mark turned back toward the chamber. Anna was still studying the stalactite. The moment she saw him, she slipped her phone into her pocket and smiled. "Everything okay?" "Not exactly. There's been a problem at work. I have to fly home tonight." Her expression changed, the disappointment appearing and vanishing so fast someone else might never have caught it. "Tonight?" "My taxi's 20 minutes out." How could he explain in 20 minutes that they hadn't even been staying at the same hotel, that every conversation about the pool and the hammocks and the evening lights had been built on a mistake neither of them had noticed? It wasn't a conversation that could happen beside a stalactite with a taxi waiting outside. He almost reached for her shoulder, stopped himself. An unfinished gesture would feel worse than none at all. "So, I'll see you tonight," he said instead, forcing a smile. "By the pool, no excuses." He didn't correct her. Not about the pool, not about the hotel. There wasn't time. "I have to go. See you later." He turned and walked fast enough that it was nearly a run. At the last bend, he glanced back. Anna was exactly where he'd left her, her silhouette strange in the amber light, as though she were already becoming a memory instead of someone only a few meters away. Even after the chamber disappeared behind the stone walls, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching him.
Chapter 5. The Pool. Anna remembered the rest of the excursion only in fragments. The fortress, the guide's stories of sieges. She listened, took photographs, asked the right questions at the right moments, but her thoughts kept circling back to Mark walking away through the cave, quickly, almost running, glancing back once before the bend swallowed him. Something really must have happened, she thought. Without him, the fortress was simply old stone, beautiful, interesting, but missing the second layer a place acquired the moment there was someone beside you to share it with. Back at the hotel, she showered, then spent longer than usual choosing a dress. Not because she was dressing for him, she told herself. After a full day outdoors, she'd have changed anyway. By the time she reached the pool, the first lanterns had begun glowing across the rooftop, the same lanterns they'd talked about on the coach that morning. The pool had turned almost black beneath the evening sky, glowing softly from lights hidden below. Mark wasn't there. She chose a lounger near the entrance, where she could see both the pool and the path from the rooms. She placed her phone beside her. Not that it mattered. She still didn't have his number. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Perhaps the problem at work was worse than he'd expected. Perhaps he'd gone straight to bed after the flight. Every explanation sounded reasonable. None of them explained why he hadn't sent even a single message. Then she remembered. He couldn't. They had never exchanged numbers. The pool slowly emptied around her. She ordered something cold with mint and lime and watched families drift toward dinner, watched a group of 20-somethings burst into laughter over someone's phone. She opened a message to her friend, the one who should have been on the next lounger, typed a few lines, deleted them. Better to tell the finished version, hopefully the happy one. She opened her photo gallery instead. The picture Mark had taken beside the springs. She smiled beside herself, remembering the elderly woman. Such a shame. You make a lovely couple. At the time, they'd laughed. Now the memory hurt in a way she couldn't quite explain. Eventually, she stood and checked the rooftop restaurant. Near the far side, a man sat alone with his back to the entrance. Dark hair, broad shoulders. Her heart leapt. She walked faster. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. A stranger. "I'm sorry," she said, and left before he could look confused, her cheeks burning all the way to the lift. The lobby was no more successful. By 10:30, she admitted that waiting any longer wouldn't change anything. She slowed as she passed reception. She could ask whether a guest named Mark had checked in, whether anyone had mentioned a delayed flight. The thought disappeared as fast as it came. A woman meets a man on a tour bus and goes looking for him at reception the same night. Far too dramatic. He was probably exhausted, that's all. He hadn't made promises. He'd simply said, "See you later." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was logical, and Anna had always trusted logic more than emotion. Even so, when she finally climbed into bed, a small chill settled beneath her ribs. Not fear, not yet, only the faint suggestion that something wasn't quite right. A hairline crack in what had otherwise been one of the happiest days she'd had in years. Maybe he went straight to sleep after the flight, she told herself, pulling the duvet higher. I'll see him at breakfast. The hotel's big, but not so big that two people can miss each other for another whole day. That thought stayed with her until sleep finally came. Only Anna lay awake, believing that tomorrow would explain everything.
Chapter 6. The Mirror Hotel. At breakfast, Anna chose a table facing the entrance and ate slowly, lifting her eyes every time someone walked in. Mark never appeared. When breakfast was over, her feet carried her to reception before she decided to make a scene. "Could you tell me whether you have a guest named Mark, English, checked in 3 days ago?" The receptionist typed, scanned the screen. "I'm afraid we don't have anyone registered under that name." "Could he be under his surname, or someone else made the reservation?" "I checked every arrival this week. There's no guest called Mark." Anna stepped away from the desk, the unease she'd carried since the previous evening hardening into something real. He'd said he was staying here, hadn't he? Or had she merely assumed it? She tried to replay their conversation, sentence by sentence. He'd never actually said Royal Pearl Premium. He simply agreed when she described the hammocks, nodded when she talked about the lanterns. She'd filled in the rest herself. She tested it, asked a waiter near the pool bar whether there was a hammock area on the property. He frowned. "No, miss, sun loungers and the cabanas." "No hammocks?" "No." By evening, she was following a suspicion she could no longer ignore. She walked slowly along the edge of the resort, along a stretch of fence she'd never explored, and 5 minutes later saw it. Another hotel. Identical architecture, same cream facade, same fountain, only the sign was different. Royal Pearl Resort and Spa, without the word premium. Heat flooded through her. Her hotel stood behind her. This one stood ahead, separated by nothing more than a narrow road. Inside, the lobby was a mirror of her own. "I'm looking for a guest, Mark, from England, staying here the past few days." The receptionist typed, scanned the screen. "I'm afraid we don't have anyone registered under that name." "Could he be under his surname, or someone else made the reservation?" "I checked every arrival this week. There's no guest called Mark." Anna stepped away from the desk, the unease she'd carried since the previous evening hardening into something real. He'd said he was staying here, hadn't he? Or had she merely assumed it? She tried to replay their conversation, sentence by sentence. He'd never actually said Royal Pearl Premium. He simply agreed when she'd described the hammocks, nodded when she talked about the lanterns. She'd filled in the rest herself. She tested it, asked a waiter near the pool bar whether there was a hammock area on the property. He frowned. "No, miss, sun loungers and the cabanas." By evening, she was following a suspicion she could no longer ignore. She walked slowly along the edge of the resort, along a stretch of fence she'd never explored, and 5 minutes later saw it. Another hotel. Identical architecture, same cream facade, same fountain, only the sign was different. Royal Pearl Resort and Spa, without the word premium. Heat flooded through her. Her hotel stood behind her. This one stood ahead, separated by nothing more than a narrow road. Inside, the lobby was a mirror of her own. "I'm looking for a guest, Mark, from England, staying here the past few days." The receptionist typed, scanned the screen. "I'm afraid we don't have anyone registered under that name." Could he be under his surname, or someone else made the reservation? "I checked every arrival this week. There's no guest called Mark." Outside, the evening air felt colder than it had an hour earlier. She walked the narrow road between the two hotels, back and forth, past identical flower beds and gates that differed by a single word. There had always been two hotels. Every remarkable coincidence she'd taken as fate had been nothing more than two sister buildings standing opposite one another. She remembered him saying, "It's a big hotel." At the time, she barely noticed. Now it meant something else entirely. It hadn't been indifference, hadn't been dishonesty. Just two people too busy enjoying each other's company to verify the simplest detail. She hadn't checked either. For the first time in years, she'd accepted something without demanding proof, and this is where it had led. She sat on the low stone edge of the fountain, where she could see both buildings. He had left yesterday evening. While she'd been sitting by the pool inventing reasonable explanations, he probably was already on a plane. What hurt wasn't that he'd left. Work happens, she understood that better than most people. What hurt was that he'd left without ever discovering where she was actually staying, and she'd let him go without leaving any way to find her. She didn't know his surname, didn't know his number, wasn't even certain where he lived, beyond a passing mention of Manchester. One first name, a few hours of conversation, and a feeling that now seemed like the only proof any of it had happened. Above the two identical hotels, the first stars began appearing in the night sky.
Chapter 7. Mark starts looking. The plane landed well after midnight. Within the hour, Mark was standing beneath construction floodlights, checking the cracked columns himself before he signed anything, exactly as he'd done ever since the Foreman incident 3 years earlier. Nothing critical. Work resumed at dawn. Only later, driving home with his body heavy from exhaustion and too little sleep, did he let himself think about the problem that truly wouldn't leave him alone. He called the hotel, the ordinary Royal Pearl, the one where he'd actually stayed. "I'm trying to find one of your guests. Her name's Anna from London. I've checked every arrival from the past week. There isn't a guest called Anna." He stared at the screen. If he'd been staying at the Royal Pearl and Anna at the Premium, then he'd been calling the wrong hotel. He dialed again. This call was harder, not technically, emotionally. He already knew what the answer would be. "I'm afraid I can't help you," the Premium receptionist said, kindly but firmly. "We aren't permitted to disclose information about our guests." One possibility remained: the tour operator. He took half a day's leave. The first time in months he'd taken time off for anything that wasn't an emergency, and told the travel agent everything. The wrong coach, the bottle of water, the cave, the hotel vouchers. She listened without interrupting.
"I'm not allowed to disclose our client's personal information," she said at last, "but I can tell you this much." She lowered her voice. "There was a passenger called Anna on that tour." Mark hardly breathed. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with surprising sincerity. It wasn't much, but hearing she'd been real, that he hadn't imagined any of it, felt like being handed something far more valuable than a simple confirmation. He searched social media that evening. Anna, London, hundreds of profiles. He added IT, then project manager. None of the faces belonged to her. He posted in 2 travel groups. "Did anyone happen to be on the excursion to the hot springs last Tuesday? I'm trying to find a woman called Anna." Hours passed. One reply. "Do you have a photo?" He didn't, not one. They'd spent the entire day photographing each other, never together. By the following week, the site had slipped back into its normal rhythm, and Mark went through the motions of a life that suddenly felt like someone else's. Reports, meetings, praise for handling the inspection well, none of it landing the way it should have. 3 days of silence, then a fourth. Late one evening, alone in his office with only his phone's glow for light, 2 texts arrived from the friend who'd traveled with him. "You all right?" An hour later, "Seriously, where did you disappear to?" He called the next morning and told him everything. "You?" his friend said, laughing in disbelief. "The most careful man I've ever met got on the wrong coach?" "It happened." "Mark," his friend sounded genuinely bewildered. "That doesn't sound like you." "I know." The words came out almost as a sigh, because they were true. After the call, he opened the airline app, looked at flights to Turkey, and closed it again. For the first time in years, he was facing a problem he didn't know how to solve. No blueprint could help him, no checklist, because he had no idea where to begin looking for the one person he couldn't bear to lose.
Chapter 8. The Last Chance. Anna began the 3rd day with a plan, nothing like the one she'd made in front of the mirror before meeting Mark at the pool. Social media had led to nowhere. The travel groups, the tour operator, the hotels, every avenue ended in exactly the same place. Nowhere. That evening, she called her friend, the one who should have been beside her in Turkey. "You're serious?" her friend asked. "After one day on a coach?" "I know how it sounds." "No, I'm not laughing at you. It's just, this isn't you. You won't try a new coffee shop until you've read 30 reviews." "I don't know what happened," Anna admitted. "That's why I'm calling instead of pretending everything's fine." Her friend's voice gentled. "If he didn't matter, would you still be looking for him?" "No." "Then keep looking." The conversation gave her no new ideas, but after hanging up, she realized something had quietly changed. She was finally willing to try the option she'd dismissed from the start as far too desperate. The next morning, with her suitcase half packed for tomorrow's flight home, she opened the tour operator's Instagram page. The latest post promoted the same excursion, hot springs, cave, fortress, and beneath it, the usual questions about price and timing. She stared at the empty comment box, typed, deleted, started again. The problem wasn't finding the words. The problem was pressing post. A woman searching for a man she'd known for one day. All her instincts fought against it. But there were no more possibilities left, only time and not much of it. She typed one final version. "If anyone was on the excursion to the cave and the hot springs 3 days ago and remembers a man called Mark, please message me. It's important." She pressed post before she could lose her nerve a second time that day. Hundreds of miles away, Mark's phone vibrated. "Hope you find him." Then the comment vanished. A moderator had deleted it, probably mistaking it for spam.
The last lead gone because of a single click from someone who had no idea what they'd erased. Tomorrow there would be a suitcase, an airport, a flight home, not because she'd chosen to stop looking, simply because there was nowhere left to look. The message arrived 10 minutes before she even thought to check her inbox. I saw your comment before it was deleted. I was sitting a few rows in front of you on the coach that day. I remember the guy you spent the whole journey talking to. Here's his Instagram if it's the same Mark. She read it 3 times before she tapped the link. She recognized him instantly before she even read the name, the same smile he'd given her beside the fridge full of bottled water. Mark Dorsey, Manchester. Her hands trembled as she opened the message window. What did you write after 3 days of silence? In the end, she wrote only 3 words. Wrong bus, water, Anna. Her thumb hovered above send. If he never replied, if this wasn't the right Mark, if it was and he'd already forgotten her, this would become the most embarrassing moment of her adult life. Silence for one more day would hurt more. She pressed send before she could lose her nerve a second time that day. Hundreds of miles away, Mark's phone vibrated. Chapter 9. The Ticket. Mark's phone vibrated just as he stepped out of the shower. Probably the client, he thought, drying his hands before picking it up. An unfamiliar Instagram account. 3 words. Wrong bus, water, Anna. He read them once, twice, a third time. Not because he needed time to understand, he'd understood immediately. It was because somewhere deep down he'd been waiting for exactly those words without ever admitting he was waiting at all. He opened the profile. It was her. He knew before he even looked properly. He opened the airline app, the same one he'd closed a few days earlier without searching. This time he searched. Earliest departure in 4 hours, 1 stop in Istanbul, only a couple of seats left at that price. A week ago, he'd have spent an hour comparing alternatives. Today, he simply pressed buy. In his entire adult life, he couldn't remember making a decision without a backup plan, without sleeping on it first. Now he was buying a ticket to another country for a woman whose surname he still didn't know. He messaged his manager, family emergency, back in 2 days, and packed faster than he'd ever packed for work, a few t-shirts, a charger, his passport. Almost as an afterthought, he slipped the hotel voucher into the front pocket. Days ago, it had been proof of the mistake that ruined everything. Now it felt like a talisman. His friend let out a long whistle over the phone. "You're flying back?" "Yes." A pause. "Mark, have you completely lost your mind?" "I honestly don't know." Later, in a plastic seat near the gate, he unlocked his phone one last time. The message was still there. Wrong bus, water, Anna. He read it once more, then locked the screen without replying. There would be time for words later, or there wouldn't. Either way, this wasn't something he wanted to answer from an airport terminal. The boarding announcement echoed through the gate. For the first time in his life, he had no backup plan, only a boarding pass. A few minutes later, the aircraft lifted off, carrying him back toward the one mistake he hoped it wasn't too late to undo. Chapter 10. Both hotels. The plane landed 40 minutes late, long enough for Mark to imagine every version of the ending. She'd already checked out, left for the airport, gone home without ever knowing he'd tried to come back. He hadn't slept since stepping out of the shower that morning. The moment he cleared the terminal, he climbed into the first taxi, the Royal Pearl Premium. The driver noticed him checking his watch. Running late for a flight? The opposite. I've just landed. He hesitated. I just really need to get somewhere. What if I'm already too late? Too late by a day, by an hour, by the same handful of minutes that had separated them outside the cave. 3 days of silence could be explained, work, circumstances, bad luck. But if he missed this moment, the last chance while she was still here, there'd be no explanation left. The premium's lobby greeted him with the same marble floor he'd glimpsed the evening he'd collected his luggage. He hurried to reception. I need to see Anna. She's staying here. I don't know her room number. We met a few days ago. It's complicated. I'm sorry, the receptionist said politely, but I can't connect you to another guest's room without permission. I'd be happy to pass on a message. Is she still here? Can you at least tell me that? I'm afraid I can't disclose that either. He scanned the lobby. Sofas, the fountain, tourists waiting for transfers. Anna wasn't there. What if I've made exactly the same mistake again? He'd already confused 2 identical hotels once. Without another word, he ran back outside, across the narrow road, straight toward the hotel he'd spent 3 nights before boarding the wrong coach. I need a guest called Anna. He reached the Royal Pearl's desk out of breath. The receptionist recognized him, hesitated, then shook his head. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name. This time he knew. She was at the premium. His first instinct had been right. He ran back the way he'd come. Please let me be in time. Anna had been sitting in the premium lobby with her suitcase for almost 20 minutes, watching her phone for a reply to the 3 words she'd sent the night before. Nothing. Not even seen. Perhaps he didn't check Instagram every day. Perhaps it wasn't even the right mark. Perhaps she'd convinced herself too quickly because she had wanted to believe. None of the possibilities made her feel any better. She had almost decided it was better this way, to leave the story unfinished here, in this lobby, than to carry a rejection back to London with her. The hotel doors burst open. At first, she barely looked up. People were arriving and leaving constantly. But there was something about the way one man entered, almost running, breathless, urgent, that made her lift her head. Mark stood only a few steps away. Backpack crooked on one shoulder, stubble thicker than she remembered, hair as if he'd spent the whole journey running his hands through it. Anna forgot the suitcase, the transfer, the flight, everything except that single moment. Neither of them moved. Part of her feared that if she blinked, he'd become someone else. Around them, the hotel carried on, oblivious, suitcases rolling, someone laughing near reception, while the 2 of them seemed suspended outside it. Anna moved first, 1 step, then another, until she stopped an arm's length away, studying his face as though checking it against 3 days of memory. Then, at exactly the same moment, they both smiled. I checked both hotels, Mark said, still catching his breath. Thought I'd mixed them up again. I did the same thing, she shook her head, 2 days ago. I walked back and forth between them until I finally found you. He took 1 slow step closer. You know, I've spent my whole life trying to not make mistakes. And? He smiled. The best thing that's ever happened to me started because I got on the wrong bus. Something inside Anna finally loosened, the knot she'd carried for 3 endless days simply gone. She closed the final step between them and wrapped her arms around him. He held her back so tightly he forgot for a second how to breathe. Outside, a minibus pulled up at the entrance. I think that's mine, she murmured, without moving. I'm coming with you. She reached for her suitcase. He picked it up before she could, and hand in hand, they walked out of the hotel together.
Epilogue. A month later, they flew back to Turkey, this time on the same flight. Somewhere over the Black Sea, Anna fell asleep on his shoulder, and Mark stayed perfectly still for the rest of the journey, terrified that moving would wake her. "My arm's completely numb," he confessed with a grin as they waited for their luggage. "You could have moved, because you were sleeping." She smiled and threaded her fingers through his. This time, Anna handled the booking herself and checked the name 3 times before paying. Royal Pearl Resort and Spa. She narrowed her eyes at the screen. No premium. "I believe you, but if you want to be absolutely certain, you can read it once more." She nudged him with her elbow, and they both laughed, the easy kind, shared by people whose greatest disaster had quietly become their favorite private joke. At reception, the woman checking them in looked faintly puzzled when Anna asked for the 4th time whether there wasn't another hotel nearby with almost the same name. "We only have one hotel with this name," the receptionist said. "We know. We've just developed a professional habit of checking everything." "Both of us," Anna added, smiling. "It's a shared habit now." That evening, the hammocks still hung beneath the terrace, and the rooftop lanterns lit one by one, exactly as they had on the day they'd met. On their way to dinner, they passed the spot where Anna had once stood frozen, waiting for someone to tell her anything that might lead her back to him. "By then," Mark said when she told him, "I'd already bought my ticket back." He said it so simply, the weight of it felt even greater, as if flying halfway across the world for her had been the most natural decision imaginable. The next morning, they arrived early for the same excursion: the springs, the cave, the fortress, and Anna had even packed an extra bottle of water, just in case. Outside the hotel stood 2 identical coaches. Mark looked at them, then at her, the familiar smile returning. "The usual inspection?" "Professional habit," she said, and reached for his hand instead. "This time, I'm not letting you go anywhere without me." They climbed aboard together, and there it was, the little refrigerator by the entrance, now filled with neat rows of ice-cold bottles instead of one warm one. "This time," Mark said, "it's your turn." Anna took 2 and placed one in his hand without a word. They walked toward the seats by the window, the very same seats where everything had begun. As the coach pulled away toward the mountains, Mark held out his hand, palm up. Anna slipped hers into his without a word. Outside, the same dry hills rolled past, the same olive trees, only this time they were traveling on the same bus.